Reverend Rob, the prophet of prophets. Can you tell me how to get rich in a recession?
Fingers crossed. I can tell you a couple of tricks to stop you from going broke and help you get rich in a recession.
Right. Excellent. Excellent. Hey, this is Craig Valentine. I'm here with my friend Rob Hanley. I'm in Mexico. Rob's in Portugal. He's Australian. I'm Canadian. That's what makes the world go round. So this is what we're going to do today, but is help everybody who's watching, listening, get rich in a recession, whether they own a business, whether they're looking to buy a business. We'll kind of cover a whole bunch of stuff here. But Rob, first, I want to know what the heck is happening in Europe here late in 2022. What's the vibe? What's the future hold over there? In general, Europe, anything you know about specific countries, and then in Portugal, where you live.
Yeah, sure, man. It's mixed, obviously. So with Nord Stream 2 and Gazprom issues going on, Germans have been very worried about that. So there's been a lot of that circulating in the news. But when you talk to Portuguese people here, so today I had a couple of meetings with bankers and attorneys and whatnot, and the topic comes up of, hey, what's going to happen in winter? But I've noticed that most of them aren't too concerned.
Portuguese winter is not a German winter.
It's not a German winter, and also different gas utilization, right? So that's the first part. And that's really important because often people throw Europe as a homogenous thing. This is what's happening in Europe. Sure, but there's a lot of things in Europe. There's a lot of parts in Europe.
That's like saying you're going to get killed on the streets in Mexico. Mexico is a very dangerous place in Tijuana, but it's not as dangerous of a place in many, many other places.
Yeah, like if you're at the heart of Polanco having a coffee, it's unlikely that something bad's going to happen in Mexico to you. So I mean, that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Here in Portugal in particular, I think there's a little bit of concern about recession. There's a little bit of concern about the package that just got announced, which is they're doing a cash payment essentially to people. So 125 euros put into your bank account in October that people can apply for. And there's some scaling
125 euros.
Yep.
And what is that for?
To make ends meet.
And it's monthly?
Nope, it's one-off.
125 euros.
Yeah, that's like 3 days ago. So it's also worth keeping in mind that the minimum salary here is, I think, 765 euros a month. So just to put things in proportion, right? It's like if you talk about the price of anything, you should always consider the context it's in. So if
it's like $1,500 in the United States.
Yeah, you just start to put the numbers together and go, okay, this starts to make more sense, right? So anyway, they're doing 125 or maybe it was 135, can't remember, euro cashing. Then otherwise, it depends on the generation, right? So Lisbon itself, the real estate market's gone through the roof, and that's been really well supported. And that kind of turns into the future of Europe is the US dollar is a lot stronger against the euro than it's been, I think, actually, since the start of the Eurozone, if memory serves. We're talking 30 years. The tourism is being really driven by that. So owning a business that focuses on tourists, expats, non-habitual residents, people who've retired here, but have their funds sourced in US dollars is quite beneficial. We've really noticed that here on the streets lately. I was in Barcelona recently before being back in Lisbon, and you really notice that there's a lot of Americans around, more than historically, I would say, which is at least what it feels like. That's the vibe, is their money goes a lot further this year than it did 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Because 3 years ago, it was like $1.30 to get a euro. Now it's 1-to-1. That's a big difference for people. Beyond that, man, it's funny is I've got a couple of Ukrainian friends here who are very well obviously connected to what's happening. Their attitude is obviously a bit sad, but I think there is a case of, and this is just speaking for a very small population, I'll be really clear. I'm not talking for all Ukrainians. I'm not talking about anything beyond what I'm talking to. But they seem to have this sense of, it sucks what's happening, but we have to get on with life, right? The world doesn't stop because bad things are happening. You still have to get on. They also seem to be really good at finding the joy. So a contact of mine here, his wife is Ukrainian. They're expecting kids in the next week or two. Her parents are Ukrainian, and they're really focusing on that as the good side of things. So no matter how bad it gets, look for the good.
What's all the news mean, and what discussions have helped you form an opinion of what it all means for American businesses?
So here, not so much, but speaking to the bankers and the lawyers and the usual heart of the commercial world is always what gives me a lot of insight. So Americans have two things going on from my perspective and based on these conversations. One is credit, just as a whole. Like, can you borrow more money? But then there's the question of how far does that credit go? And this is where the impacts start to happen of retail businesses are under a lot more stress because twofold is one, can they get the money in? And then two, as more retail businesses struggle, or wholesalers to retail, then the wholesalers are at threat because the wholesalers don't have cash management. A conversation I had with a banker recently, he and I were just talking about for the last 10 years, you've basically just had to have a company and show up every day and the money was there. Now, there are obviously exceptions to this, but it was pretty easy. The people were willing to spend. But now having a good idea is not enough. Now you have to have good operations. Now you've got to be efficient. Now you've got to manage your cash flow. Now you've got to manage your debt. These are things that are, from one of the bankers I spoke to, an indication of we're expecting businesses to fail, not because they're not good strategically, but because operationally and financially, they don't know what they're doing. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it is. So we have a mutual friend who runs a business in France that serves Germany, and it's definitely inventory heavy. What kind of, thinking of him and just in general terms, what kind of advice would you be giving to somebody in that situation?
I think the biggest thing here is relationships. One of the things I have noticed about doing business in Europe is that Europe is very relationship oriented versus mercantile orientation. So taking a moment to really solidify those relationships with suppliers that'll give you more wiggle room. That will give you a little bit of flexibility and a little breathing room if things do go poorly. So that's the first thing I do. That's just a general, have good relationships with the people you do business with and expect to maintain that relationship for 20 years. And if you start with that, you're not going to try and stiff them for an extra 3 days on making a payment when you know I'm going to have to deal with this person for 20 years. So I think that there's an element of that versus the US where they seem to be a little more mercantile. The other part of it is if you are an inventory heavy business, especially if you're assembling something like this friend of ours in France, you need to be looking at all the raw materials that go into your product to understand where might you get stiffed. So years ago, I did a turnaround on a supplement company and we had major importing from China. So there was some very key ingredients we could only get from a key Chinese supplier at the time. And our problem was that if they couldn't get it, we had no product. That just added massive delays. And then there was a change in UK law. And while the products we were selling were exempt, they were listed in the law as being exempt, it still put more pressure on us to be able to get those ingredients into the country. So it's really important to basically sit down and say, hey, what do I sell and what's that made of? And what's happening in those independent industries? What's happening to those inventory levels, those stocks and flows?
A bunch of people in the Amazon world. What are they seeing with all those people who were, fulfilled by Amazon getting stuff from China?
It depends. To be entirely honest, I know it's a broad answer, but some of them have been doing really well. So I was having a coffee the other day with a guy who's in the FBA space. He has a couple of really great products, but they're very seasonal, right? So a lot of FBA businesses are also obviously very seasonal because they're retail. So you're expecting Black Friday, like that stuff we've talked about before in previous episodes. But he has put all his capital into inventory now to basically make sure that if inflation kicks in, he's still got the product. That was one of the biggest things that he did. He foresaw issues with shipping prices going up further into the future. He saw issues with raw material costs going up, so he just prepaid. He literally took all the spare capital that he had. I think he took on some fairly sizable loans as well to make sure that no matter what happened, at peak selling moment, he was not stock out. And that's
we might have to buy him some poker chips that say put all chips on whatever his name is.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to make the bets.
Yeah,
you got to make the bets.
That's a little inside joke. I once told Rob to put all the chips on Rob in a certain situation. Then he bought me a poker chip that said that.
I think it's a great little poker chip. I hope you still have some where you give them out or something. It's great.
So months ago, we chatted about your views on recession and inflation. Have they gotten darker? Have they gotten more optimistic in the last few months? Have your timelines changed on anything?
So I'm a big fan of a company called ITR. And this is something that was put onto by Jeff Schneider. And ITR has some really interesting ways that they assess data, like what do they think is the chances of recession versus slowdown, all these pieces. And what I really like is that they are using data to explain their hypotheses. and say, hey, because we're seeing A, B, and C, we think this is going to happen. There's going to be a slowdown. There is a slowdown. What I mean, it's already here. I think that you've got, as humans, we have a habit of only looking at people who are like us and using that as our sources of information. So all the people in the online world look at what other people in the online world are doing and say, hey, do you think that's a recession? Oh, look, you run an SEO site with 3 employees that does 3 million a year. You've got 2.5 million margin. Oh, no, don't worry about a recession. That's fine. But they neglect to realize that the vast majority of their consumers earn 45,000 on average a year, and maybe aren't going to be able to keep buying these $200 supplements. So there's that side of it. The other thing I'm seeing is the multiples in acquisitions has dropped dramatically. So last year so there was a frothy market. You speak to anybody and everything was going for 9-fold, 10-fold, 11-fold. You and I know someone who made an incredibly timed exit by dumb luck. It's not fair to call it dumb luck. He was probably very aware of what he was doing, but he couldn't sell his business for half of what he sold it for. I don't think he'd get that now. He just timed it incredibly well. And I think you're going to see a lot of people kind of come back to earth. Look, at the end of the day, business is challenging. It's not just enough to throw up a landing page and hope for the best. That helps. But going back, sorry, I kind of went off a tangent there about getting stuck in a vacuum of the people you know. My predictions, there is going to be continual slowdown. I'm quite confident about that. I think that you will see, oh yes, go on, I saw the hand.
Do you think that it will be kind of, like lagging in one part of the world? Like, will it be, the recession will be Europe first, then America, or will be, and then, China, and then back to, like, do you think it'll be that, or do you think it'll be worldwide, kind of the same?
I'm not smart enough to tell anybody something they could build an opinion of. So I just want to flag that early for anyone listening. I know the limits of my confidence. What I'm seeing here is I feel that Europe's obviously going to be hit because of the energy side of things, right? That's just going to essentially shrink the amount of available income for purchasing other goods and services. That just happens. And then when there's less velocity in money, velocity of money slows down, there's just less things being bought, and that just drives a recession. I think some areas will be protected. So looking at places that have tax benefits or tax structures that benefit expats, people bringing money over. So in Portugal, there's the non-habitual residence scheme. Spain has their equivalents. There's all these things that create bubbles of money and will create bubbles of protection. I think that is something.
They remind me of the arbitrage that, has been around forever, but Tim Ferriss describes in 4-Hour Workweek of, working here and getting paid in US dollars. That's really what it sounded like with the tourism thing is,
yep.
Americans are flush with more valuable cash than ever, and can take advantage of bargains in Europe, even if the bargains are just, 2 weeks in Venice.
Yeah. And I think there's something worth noting there is, so I used to travel a lot. I was always bouncing around, right? Like I lived all over the world. I went to all sorts of places. And actually one of the biggest problems I had was figuring out what's the best way to manage or measure my financial position. Do I measure it in US dollars because that's where a lot of my income is? Or if I'm in Thailand, do I just measure it in Thai baht? Or if I'm Australian and in the first year or two, should I measure it in Aussie dollars and I'm in Europe? And it was really, really difficult to figure out, how do you get your measuring stick? What are you using? How do you figure out if you're getting better or worse? And there's two basic schools of thought. And for anyone who's listening to this to consider is, number one, do it where you live, wherever you consume. That's it. Just where do you consume? How are you going based on the area you consume? So, for example, you live in pesos, you'd probably be managing your balance sheet in pesos on a personal level, because then you actually know whether your buying power is increasing or decreasing. The second side then is Nassim Taleb in his book on options trading, dynamic trading, hedging of options, or whatever it was called. It's very boring, but it's interesting. He talks about measuring your P&L in S&P 500 units. Because, hey, if you're trading, you've got to be doing better than the S&P 500. So if you're not making a gain of the S&P 500, why are you doing this? What's the point? And this is a cold, hard part, is if you choose to engage in a financial activity, actively as well, if you're not passively, you've got to be doing better than you could do passively. That's a really key component. So people start their own businesses, and maybe their 12-month timeline is not a fair timeline, to be entirely honest. But if you're looking at this over 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, the real question is, how much equity have I got in this and what return does it get me? And based on where I am in the world, what am I measuring that against? I think that's worth keeping in mind.
Yeah. So let's then switch over to some real brass tacks business stuff. What are the things that you're most excited about these days in terms of business opportunities?
For me and my personality, what I really love is finding businesses that people who have good commercial sense and understanding their customer, and they know how to meet their customers' needs on a strategic basis, like how to drop their assets in such a way that will leverage their assets in such a way it solves the customer pain point. What I'm excited about is helping those people who have that side of things dialed in, but not the operational and financial side. So a huge part of my background over the last few years and focus on my work has been partnering with people who understand those elements and maybe struggle on the operational and financial part. They get the customer, they get the strategy. That excites me because in a very positive sense, the world needs two things. The world needs difference of opinions and perspectives, and it needs people to solve problems, provide solutions. And that's what really, I think, fits together nicely, because if I only ever worked with people like me, there'd be no value created because we're both good at the same thing. And likewise, if those people refuse to work with people like me and they stay in their little bubble, well, the company disappears and there's no value created. So that's the first part. And the second part is when those people have such good solutions, then people have more value. And as people have a better quality of life, more things can happen. So that's something I'm really excited about at the moment. And really just, honestly, man, focusing on what my life is going to, how my life aligns with the work I'm doing. I met up with an entrepreneur in Barcelona who I've known since 2015. We met in Colombia. And we were just talking about what we're doing in business and life. And it was this comment of the wrong answer is to pursue the most financially optimized path. Because for most people, that is not what you want to do. No one wants to, or not no one, but a large majority of the population doesn't want to do 80 hours a week on Wall Street. So if you're pursuing the most financially optimized path, you might go get on Wall Street or private equity or something, but you'll probably be miserable. You will do far better and stay enrolled far longer if you do what is aligned with your interests, your skills, and what you are uncommonly good at. So that's what I'm really excited about at the moment. What about you? What are you excited
about? I am excited about. Actually, we'll talk about it in a bit because
Sure.
I'm excited about something that I need a little bit of help with. Now,
cool.
Yeah, so we'll get to that. I want to talk a little bit about strategy, but what wouldn't you touch with a 10-foot pole? So first of all, I think you have fundamental principles in business that would give you this answer. But then in addition to that, considering the environment in which we're in, what wouldn't you touch with a 10-foot pole when it comes to business?
I'm
not talking about an angry octopus.
No. I would be unwilling to involve myself in businesses where the only way to get ahead or to thrive in them right now is to be dirty. So I was talking with a friend today, actually, who he's doing acquisitions in the fashion industry. And he looked at a couple of other industries and he was recounting to me this story of someone who was, first of all, lying about their financials, which is a stupid thing to do to an investor because your investor's going to see the books. And the second thing was the only way this company stayed profitable on their media spend was by making it impossible, near impossible to get a refund. You had to send 3 emails and then they would call you and then they would try and downsell you on the phone. And I'm not saying that that economically doesn't work. I'm just saying I wouldn't touch on those businesses with a 10-foot pole. The reason for that is you're running on a very razor thin kind of edge here. You also have great, putting aside the ethics and morals, right? Like just really put that aside. Look at the business model. You are fighting your customer at every step. Like that's not a business that's going to generate referrals. That's not going to be a business that works off anything other than an arbitrage. And maybe that's fine for some people, but if you're not building total enterprise value, something meaningful, what's the point of doing it? Especially in the middle of a recession. So that's the first kind of thing I would touch with a 10-foot pole. Second thing is I wouldn't be touching speculative things. And what I mean by that is where you have to be right to win or you lose big. And now we can talk about bet size and something else another time, but people who are getting into what's been the hot industries for the last, say, 3 years, you're late. You've missed the early gains, right? If you're getting into speculative property development in the heart of Lisbon, it's too late. You've missed it. Like it's happened. You better have some real skills to get in there now. Whereas if you were trying to do property development in a new area where the cost of land is super low and the government's willing to give grants and funding, and you can bring other people in, yeah, for sure, go for it. But I think that's really important to be aware that if it's a high cost to get into a speculation, chances are, first of all, the returns are going to be much lower, right? So easy, simple example is I used to live in a 2-story penthouse in Lisbon when I first moved here. We were renting it for, I think, €1,200 a month, fully furnished, plus bills. It was like where we landed, boots on ground when we first got here. I think you came to that place.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think he sold that. The owner sold it for around, he was looking for 400, I think, from memory, 400,000. That seemed a little expensive at the time because it felt like Lisbon was bubbling, like we couldn't make sense of it. But we'd only been here for a couple of months. That apartment now probably goes for 800,000. Now, going from 400,000 to 800,000, if these numbers are right, I mean, you're doubling the business, doubling the value of the asset. That's really impressive. What's the odds that that's going to go up another 400,000 or 800,000 in the next 4 years? Pretty low. So you better have a real good margin of safety that's involved with that. So that's what I mean when I talk about speculative high entry ventures.
Yeah, it reminds me of the one and only apartment I owned in Toronto. I bought it at $450. A year later, or less than a year later, I sold it for $550, and I felt like a thief in the night getting out of there.
Wow.
A year ago or 2 years ago was $900.
When did you first sell it? How long ago? Like, what's the time?
So I probably bought it in 2012 and sold it in 2013. Those are rough. It's somewhere in that.
Sure.
And then, 6 years later, it was probably 700, 800, 900. Toronto real estate has gone up even more in the last 2 years. It's just starting to decrease now. So it really bubbled up. So I wouldn't be surprised if somebody got close to $1 million for it. My sister bought a duplex in downtown Toronto for 700, I believe. She did a lot of work on it, and she could get $1.7 million for it now.
1.7.
Yeah.
Great.
But she'll never sell it. She loves it. And actually, there's a very old Portuguese lady that lives beside her, Maria, whose husband passed away a long time ago. She goes to mass every morning at like 6 o'clock in the morning, walks through the dark streets of Toronto. And it's a nice area, but there are right around the corner, there's, these needle and like, I don't know if they're like halfway houses or whatever. So there's bad characters in, but this lady goes to mass in the middle of the winter in the dark. But this lady, this Portuguese lady hasn't renovated her house in 40, 50 years next door. So it'll be interesting to see what that thing goes for when Maria, moves on to a senior's home or something.
I mean, I saw something in Toronto the other day, just as a quick sidebar, which was a container house, and it was asking like $1.2 million, 1.2 million Canadian dollars in Toronto for a container house. And to me, it's
Vancouver was the same way, man. I mean, Vancouver, you would see these things like, man, like that's an $80,000 house in Stratford, Ontario, and it was going for over $1 million, probably $1.5 million. And they weren't buying the house; they were buying the lot.
Yeah, sure.
But still, like, it's just stupid. Like every single person that buys a home, it's like, I mean, you're an idiot.
Well, I think this is the other thing is, I saw a post today about a guy who's a doctor who had references, cash, all these things, and got outbid in the property market. And I mean, he seems like a pretty solid person to loan to. But actually, at the same time as I thought that, I'd just come back from a meeting with a banker about maybe buying some debt. And when I looked at that, I thought, man, can you imagine putting in all that effort to buy a non-productive asset, and then it doesn't even mean you're going to have liquidity when you want to sell? Like, the truth is, if all the prices go up dramatically, who's buying? Who's going to buy it? Who can afford it? I mean, if a doctor with all these references and capital can't do it, shrinking pool.
And the thing is, nobody can sell the house, because if they sell the house, where are they going to go and live? Because they can't buy another house that's as good as it or better than what they have right now. So you get like the few people who can cash out and move to Florida because they can retire. There's some people, but it's this game of expensive musical chairs that nobody ever wins. I mean, they were having in the last year in Toronto, 13 offers on day one for a house and getting, 10, 20, 30% over asking. And that's since
insane.
cooled down. And now the people that bought those houses must be like slapping themselves in the face.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting two parts is one, we're all victims of the amygdala, right? We're all scared that we're going to miss out. Oh my God, this is the last house in Toronto. I have to add 30% on asking. Man, you probably could have taken 10% over asking, rented a beautiful house for 12 months, and then bought it when it was cheaper and have a total lower cost of ownership and lower property tax. Yeah. And that's easy to say from a sideline, right? Like very easy to say. But the other thing, and I think this is worth considering, is that houses historically are fantastic savings vehicles. But I know very few people over the age of 60 who sold their house to buy something bigger. They always downsize. And basically the historical path to retirement or managing retirement is money in your 401k or your investment or self-managed super or wherever you are, whatever it is. Buy a house, ride the asset value up, sell it, buy something smaller in cash or with a bit of debt, and then live off those assets as they appreciate and just sell them down and be left with nothing. And I think for a lot of people who are listening to this are either entrepreneurs with existing like mature, successful businesses or endeavoring to become that entrepreneur. It's worth really thinking about, like, what's the ideal savings plan for your retirement? Is it betting that the assets in the stock market will go up? These things which are so synthetic and completely divorced from the underlying assets, that they're going to go up forever, like for the next 50 years. Every time I see someone giving personal finance advice saying, hey, the US stock market's gone up 8% every year for the last 40 years, I'm like, yeah, but there's got to be a point where we all agree that this is stupid. There's got to be a point where it's actually not worth buying any public company ever. And maybe I'm an idiot. Maybe I'm going to miss out on that. But it reminds me of that Taleb line of picking up pennies in front of a bulldozer. It's great until the bulldozer catches you.
Yeah. That's a good one. That reminds me of two Dan Candy phrases. So one is the stepping over dollars to pick up dimes, which is related to the question I'm going to ask you in a second. But sure. I wanted to mention before that when it comes to recession and inflation, Kennedy had this quote, and it also goes with opportunity, is that all weather is local. And I think you described that, where you're talking about, this country here and this country there. And but even within your own country, your weather is local. And so it might be hot in England, but well, it might be a part of England where it's not that hot or whatever. So it's the same with the recession, inflation stuff. Rob and I are talking generalities. And so your mileage may vary, your weather is local. So there's, with that, the tourist arbitrage thing, I never thought of it. Certainly with the rebound travel, you get the best of both worlds on that.
Yeah. Before we jump on, I want to hammer on something that I've noticed lately, and I don't know if this applies to everyone, but I'll be curious to hear your thoughts. So my personal career arc, to keep it simple, was face-to-face sales. Then I would get clients and I would do high-priced services. And eventually I ended up in direct response, which is completely different, where you're trying to build the biggest list with the highest converting offer and then retain those customers on the back end. But you're really looking for scale. And I've noticed in general that over the last, I'd say 6 to 12 months, first of all, media buying and direct response has gotten much more expensive, right? Like you're putting more capital at risk than ever before to get a return.
And it's also become more restrictive.
Massively restrictive. There's more competitors. There's this idea of Porter's 5 forces, right? Which are the ability for customers to have bargaining power on pricing, the ability for suppliers to have bargaining power on pricing, the risk of new entrants to the market, the risk of substitutes, and then inter-market competition. And the truth is, your customers can go buy from anyone now because everybody is offering X program. So you've got to differentiate. And we'll come to this actually in a second, looking at our hit list and stuff. Your media buying, what are you going to do? Get together with every other advertiser on the planet and force Facebook to reduce its costs? It's never going to happen. And if you're relying on that, there's a high risk that your business could be turned off overnight. Then you've got this lower barrier to entry for so many people. Like you talk to 23-year-olds who are making millions off drop shipping. Now, admittedly, their margins are razor thin. But when I was 23, man, we didn't have any of this stuff. When I was 23, having a PDF was the path, and it works. It still works. But now, like the knowledge is not as obscure or esoteric as it once was. So the barrier to entry is gone. And then the substitutes, man, buy a fitness program or download an app or watch a YouTube video or watch a Netflix series on fitness or ask my friend who's a personal trainer who got into the online space. Like there's just so many paths. And I think that's something that's worth remembering, is that as the world gets more competitive, I think the natural response should be deepen your relationships. And I've seen that over the last 6 to 12 months. Focus on your relationships. Yes, your customers and all that, but remember that there is a human on the other side of the transaction. You can't run it like you used to. Like I remember a mutual friend of ours whose name I'll leave out of it because we're recording, but he made a comment to me, which was, if you were
You're talking about
selling,
Jeff Bezos, right?
obviously
Jeffy
B,
friend Jeff Bezos.
yeah, Jazzy Jeff B.
Yeah.
If you were online in the early 2000s and you weren't making at least $1 million a year, you were an idiot. That was his comment. You were
I was an idiot. I was an idiot for a couple of years in the early 2000s. Then
I mean, I was an idiot too, but I was in high school, so take what you want from that. But his comment really stuck with me, because back in the early 2000s, it was the Wild West, man. There was so much opportunity. You could do anything, and it was novel and it was new. And I think we got really comfortable with this new internet world. But in my personal experience over the last 6-12 months, I think relationships are coming back in fashion. I really think that. I think it's worth for every single person to ask yourself, do you know the people who you pay to provide services or supply you with goods? Do you talk to them? Do you have a relationship? Because these things will count more again. This is where your insights, your alpha, your edge will come from. Information is too cheap now.
So let's go to opportunities and how to evaluate opportunities inside your business, and then to evaluate opportunities outside of your business, like you generally do in looking to buy new businesses. And this is goes back to the one quote that I said from Dan Kennedy, is that a lot of people step over dollars to pick up dimes, because they're either pursuing a declining industry, they're pursuing a declining revenue stream, they're pursuing activities that are not even revenue generating and stepping over the dollars from the revenue generating activity. So I do like that quote and I want to share it with everybody. But now just a specific question for you is, how do you evaluate opportunities inside of an existing business? And then when it comes to outside of a business, or if you don't have a business at all?
Sure. I reckon the best part about this is to share a little bit of history. So, the show The Prophet with Marcus Lemonis?
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this, but in the UK, there's actually a show that came before this, which was called Troubleshooter. And it was run by this English bloke with a big moustache who used to be the head of ICI Chemicals. And it's the same premise. Show up, have a look, see what happens. And he would always focus on the most important thing, which was market forces. Without a market force, forget about it. That's the most important thing to begin with. Is they talk about in strategy, and I don't like the word strategy here, but it'll have to do corporate strategy, business strategy, and functional or execution strategy. And corporate strategy is, what markets are we going to have businesses in? What businesses are we going to be in? Right? I was writing up a business plan yesterday, and I was asking this question: what businesses are we in? So if you look at people who are in the coaching space, right, they consider themselves to be coaches. But the truth is, they have a company, they've got a corporate space. And in the business strategies they have coaching. Maybe they have education. Maybe they have online education. And first of all, starting by being clear on what businesses are we actually already in. I think a lot of people don't know that. They don't actually know what business they're in. Sometimes that can be an aspirational or ideological concept. So years ago, I was a partner in a software play in the health and fitness space, and we referred to ourselves as being in the business of the fountain of youth. That was our whole thing. We're in the business of the fountain of youth. We would sell to people who remembered how their body used to be free of aches and pains when they're 18, and now they're 50 and my back, my knee, my this. We were selling the fountain of youth. That was our business. That was our focus. But then you have the very physical, tangible things like, what do I specifically sell and who am I competing with to sell this to the one consumer? And I think that's where you've got to start. The second thing then, in terms of evaluating, is once you actually understand where you are, then you can ask, well, what are the trends beneath this? So this is an idea from Realpolitik. Where does the trend go? Where's it from? Where's it going? So if you were in the black hat email spam blast selling Viagra industry. I reckon that is a lot harder today than it was 20 years ago. Well, almost guaranteed entirely. Whereas controversial, actually, here's a better comparison. There's two, one's controversial, one's not. So Substack last year. Substack made, I think, 100 million GMV last year. OnlyFans made $4.6 billion. Now, after OnlyFans paid out all its craze, because there's all money collected, OnlyFans had $900 million in turnover. And I think it was 400 and something million dollars in profit. The truth is, whether you like it or not, one-to-one entertainment, specifically in the adult space, is exploding. And it's because every person, the trend is lower cost of content creation, and everyone's got one of these phone in their hand. That's a trend that you should be keeping in mind. And the truth is, the porn industry is one of the most tip of the spear industries possible. They were the first industry to put credit cards online. So if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing half the time, because they pioneered that. They pioneered the selling of images and content. They pushed the boundaries to satisfy an ongoing need. So looking at the technological trend, you should ask yourself, what are they doing and what can I take from that? Regardless of how you feel about it, I think it's really important to keep a commercial sense of it. So now we've got, here's where I am, and here are the trends beneath me, in terms of broader trends like tech, broader trends like what's happening in the adult industry or what's happening in the publishing industry or whatever.
Well, I think the adult space is also the tech, like the consumer consummation of tech space, because in addition to the porn stuff, it's like, if you go back to like the early 2000s, who were the first online videos not in the porn space? And to me, it was viral college humor. So like collegehumor.com was a huge one. It's like, I can't even understand how we were able to share videos in 2002 of like prank jokes and stuff like that we found on collegehumor.com. So stuff like that, like how are people consuming content in a way that they aren't consuming things right now? Because obviously the huge porn probably was the only reason we probably have video now is because porn websites had to figure out how to get video down to a cheap cost in order to provide it, I guess.
Honestly, probably. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know the history of video codecs as well, but
it's kind of like why we have rubber. Rubber was accelerated in its development during World War II. So these kind of these nasty things bring these great developments. Not that you want to eat. We want more of either of those things, but it's advancement and development.
There's a point just off that. It's worth people thinking about the impact of restrictions and what they really mean. So you just brought up rubber. So back in World War II, gasoline was rationed in the UK. It wasn't rationed because they didn't have enough. It was rationed so that the rubber would last longer on the cars, which means that the car wheels would be replaced less frequently, which meant there was more rubber available for the war effort.
Oh.
So when you hear news, right, there's this idea of what's the value of X and what's the function of X. So X is the data point. There's a gasoline cap or there's a rationing or whatever. That's just X. And the function of X is, how does that affect me? What's the function? What's the impact of X on me? But also, why else might this thing exist? And I think it's really easy now when you're evaluating opportunities to only look at the value of the data. Oh my God, rationing fuel, everything's horrible. Well, maybe, but maybe this is a great indicator that there are big users of fuel elsewhere, and rubber's the industry you want to be in. It's just worth keeping that in mind.
Well, going back to the OnlyFans thing.
Sure.
So I'm a wholesome dude. I got, most of the people that follow me are wholesome people. They're like, well, I'm not going to go and start watching porn in order to get marketing lessons. So how on earth does one, because I think most people do have a general, I've seen that thing and, heard about it, but we don't really understand the tip of the spear. So how does one know that? Like, do you just talk to like the people that do use that stuff?
I think I'm a curious person, so I just kind of absorb the world as much as I can, right? Like I often think of my role as being to take in as much information as possible and synthesize it so it's practical and usable for either you or for me. Sure. That's it.
Yeah.
But John Robb actually was, if you guys aren't familiar with John Robb, he wrote Brave New War, W-A-R, War,
and
Brave New War.
John Robb with two B's.
Yeah, two B's. And I love John Robb's work. And
yeah, you know, if you're having a good day and you want to be depressed, just go and read something from John Robb.
Yeah. This is why I suggest going back to the book as opposed to his Twitter feed. It's easy to spiral, but his Twitter feed is insightful. But the book, Brave New War, was fantastic. And he talked about these ideas because John used to be, from memory, an analyst back in the day before he was involved in a tech startup. He was a military logistician, I think, doing JSOC stuff. Anyway, regardless of what he does, the guy gets trends and he gets logistics and he gets how the pieces of the puzzle fit together. He's just so insightful. And when you read that book, Brave New War, it was published from memory in 2007, and you just look at what's happened since, and you will just be like, wow, that's incredible. So I think that's a good one from history. I read another interesting book recently, which was like the Routledge Asymmetric Warfare and Guerrilla Warfare essay textbook or something. It was a very obscure publication, but I read it because I was curious about a chapter in it, which is they call them virtual entrepreneurs. And basically what that means is, how do people from ISIS recruit people on the other side of the world via social media to commit terrorist attacks? Now, I'm always fascinated about how do we get people to do anything? How's that work? And you've got to say, like, convincing someone to give up their life without ever meeting them, and then not just convincing them to do it, but like getting them all the way through to completing that is an incredible element of influence.
The relationship thing that you talked about before, that's an example of it.
It is. And I think that's the other thing to look at is who's on the cutting edge, right? Is terrorism and porn art. And the truth is, you get to choose. You can choose to not pay attention to this stuff, and you don't have to, but the information's out there and someone's going to pay attention to it. And you just get to ask, do I want to be a leading edge business? Now, and for some people, the novelty and the excitement of that is huge. And in which case I'd say, go read industry news or military news once a month, sit down, take note of the trends that are coming through. But if you're not interested in being cutting edge, honestly, the best parts will filter through to you. Don't stress yourself out. Like, you don't have to go set up an OnlyFans to get marketing lessons. Just understand that the general trend is content creation is going to go through. Gary Vaynerchuk, I think, was the one who said years ago, hey, everyone's going to make $100,000 a year from their couch. That's what's going to happen. And he's probably not wrong. The question is why? Why would that happen? And my guess is phones. Phones will be the driver because it's a mini computer. Everyone can get one. And as a fixed asset, you can get such a return on it by using just your time with it and free apps.
Yeah.
If you're willing to graft. So that was we just took a huge detour in terms of evaluating opportunities. I'm not saying everyone should get into porn. I am saying that it's important to understand the trends, the context you're in, where you are and what trends and forces are happening. But after that, I believe it comes from a good understanding of your industry. Who are your competitors? Once you know the business that you're in, who are your competitors? I often look at the strategic side of things first. Like, are we doing the right thing? And often it's more obvious that someone is doing the wrong thing than it is that they're doing the right thing. I can't express it in any way other than that, because the wrong thing is just red flags everywhere. You can just see it. It's a grind. It's not working. For whatever reason, people are not growing, but they might be executing constantly. And that's an indication you've got the wrong strategy. Whereas when people are succeeding in spite of themselves, or they're not constantly having to adjust what they're doing, that's an indicator of positive strategy. So that's the next part. Then it's, for me, operations and finance.
Say that again about a group that's succeeding in spite of itself is an example of positive strategy.
Yeah, because if you're succeeding in spite of yourself, like the indicator there is you're making all these mistakes and still getting ahead. You've clearly harnessed some form of energy, some form of market force. Now, maybe you're doing a real bad job of turning that market force into cash flow. That's possible. But if that market force is carrying you, you've obviously settled on the right idea. You're doing the right thing. You've got some kind of accidental advantage. It's just, again, you may not realize what that is.
Okay, we're going to come back to that in a second.
Okay, sure.
But I'll let you finish.
Sure. So then after that, operations and then finance. but I actually often go the other way around, right? So ops is what you're doing, finance is how do you make money. I look at it as, if I'm going to acquire a company, the first thing I want to understand is, where does it sit in a performance basis? Is it a high performing company or is it a low performing company? And that's really simple. Like, how good is it at turning its assets into cash flow? What's happening in there? Now, if it's a very high performing company, I want to know if this is a fluke or if this is a consistent earner. Is this like just a one-off, or is this historical normal? The second thing I want to look at with it is, what are the leverage points? Have they actually done better in the past in terms of efficiencies, in terms of managing gross profit, in terms of managing line items, in terms of turning profit into cash flow? I just look for those efficiencies. Where's the money disappearing? And I fixed a few companies just by looking at that alone. Don't have to worry about ops, don't have to worry about strat. Just knowing how the financial piping works has been a huge advantage. Once I look for the low-hanging fruit there, then I look at the operations. And the operations thing is, assuming we're doing the right things, how could we be doing it faster? How could we be doing it more effectively? And I don't believe that's strategy. I believe you already know what you're doing. It's just about the mechanism. What are you doing there? So that can be as simple as, how do we reduce unnecessary waste? There's a story I think I actually told last time we recorded this, of a pest control company. And the owner realized that when the wheels were turning, they weren't earning. So that was their operational constraint. They had the right basic idea, which was sell pest control services to people who were worried about pests, great. But operationally, they were spending so much time on the road and incurring expenses that didn't make sense. So they just changed the way they ordered everything. What they did was they started focusing on strip malls. Strip malls meant they spent less time driving. They had more efficiency in their trips, more revenue per drive. Huge impact, more profit per drive. So that's the next thing I look at, is opportunities. And I always believe in starting with what you've got. There's a Dutch phrase, bake with the bread you have. And this is the mistake people get stuck on, is, oh, my business isn't making enough money, I need to go do something else. And I get why people think that. But often, if you've got good revenue and you're just doing a bad job of turning it into cash flow, it's not a strategic issue. It's an actual financial operation issue. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool. I have a habit of jumping into the specifics and the tactics, so I hope that wasn't too drinking from the fire hose for anybody.
So say what you said again that I stopped. So if you're succeeding
In spite of yourself.
In spite of yourself, you have good strategy.
Yeah, pretty much. I think that's a really good rule of thumb. If
Okay.
you are,
So
sorry, just as a quick asterisk on the back of that, I think this is really important. Some people succeed because of what is called latent value. So if you got an Instagram in 2014 and you have 200 million followers or whatever, you're not succeeding because your strategy today is great. You're succeeding because 10 years ago you did something real smart, which was jump on a burgeoning new platform at a time when there weren't many about. But no one I know talks about Clubhouse anymore. That strategy was bunk. People on Clubhouse for like 3 months. My worst nightmare. Strangers talking at each other and trying to be cool. But
the rambling.
The worst. Not that I'm guilty of doing that ever. I'm perfect.
Right.
I think that's the key thing to keep in mind. If you are succeeding in spite of yourself, it's hard to tell that you're succeeding in spite of yourself. But if you sit down and you're honest and you said, hey, am I really killing it? Like, am I a high performer here? Or are things just working out for me? And the truth is, if things are just kind of working out for you, you're succeeding in spite of yourself. That's it.
So I think, so you asked earlier before, what are we most excited about? And I think I'm most excited about, though we have not figured out, is the strategy side of things, but maybe you can correct me. But so our business makes money, but we do everything well, except we don't have the right strategy. And if we had the right strategy, the fact that we're able to, we're good at marketing, the operations is solid, but our strategy is the thing that holds us back. And particular us, deciding on niche market, right now we're, I was watching some Vern Harnish scaling up today, and he said, when you're starting out, you take on any customer in your business, and when it comes to picking a niche, it's, there's everybody's, well, we don't want to exclude people and stuff like that. And it's just, it feels like that's the sticking point. So it's like the opposite of what you described. So we're making money because of our skill sets, in spite of the fact that we don't have a great strategy. And I think you know enough about my business where you'll be able to have an opinion on that.
So first thing I want to highlight for everyone listening is you're making money because you execute well. That cannot be understated, right? Like a lot of people want a magic wand and if I'll just do this one thing, everything will be easy. Sure, but maybe that one thing's not going to come for a long time and you just got to work. That's just something I think people listening should be aware of. As for strategy, I'd say, how do you personally define the word strategy?
Well, I mean, the strategy would be the long-term plan we have for growing the business, generating the right customers, and creating, optimal operations so that there is the maximum, the most profit that we can get from the business that we can.
Okay. I would define strategy as, what do we do now that gives us a sustained competitive advantage?
Okay.
For anyone, right? And it's my specific definition because it's got to be broad. And it has to acknowledge the context you operate in. I think a lot of people miss that. So the next question is, what is the best thing you have done in your business to grow? Like, just what's been the best use of your time, assets, relationships, whatever? What's the best thing you've done to grow?
I think it's email marketing.
Mm-hmm.
I think we generate the most customers today through email marketing. It's something that, it's the best thing that I've ever learned in business ever, considering my 20 plus years of selling stuff. I've sold the most stuff through email marketing. And so when I say that we do things right, we're able to get enough people onto our email list, whether they're free people or paid people, so that we can sell them additional things and deliver incredible value. When I say sell things, I mean, we get people into programs and give them amazing results. We get most of our people in through our email marketing. But I think it takes the email marketing is the most important thing because it takes a little bit longer for us because we don't have the right articulation or strategy, or we're not bringing in the right people. So we have to convince them a little bit harder. And our email marketing is so good at eventually convincing people that the business works because of that. But in spite of the fact that we haven't figured out whether it's lawyers, accountants, online businesses, financial advisors, that is the real area. And so, Vern had this great example in scaling up of that I felt was very relevant to our business. And it was a German company called Wiltshausen or something, and they're a washing machine. I don't know if you've ever seen this story, because I think it's in that Herman Simon's pricing book.
Confessions of Pricing Man?
Yeah. So I think it's in that book. And so this German washing machine, dishwasher, they make dishwashers. And so at first they were selling dishwashers to schools, to hospitals, and to restaurants and consumer. And so those are all things, but they all wanted different results, right? From the dishwasher. The school just wanted it done in one batch. The hospitals, but they didn't care if there were scratches on stuff. Not the hospitals, but the hospitals just wanted it sterilized, and they didn't care if there were scratches. But the restaurants wanted it cleaned, but with no spots on it. So they decided to only do restaurants and hotels. And then they decided to only do, certain types of restaurants and hotels. And so when they finally got to that, they owned 70% of the marketplace. But that meant telling the salespeople, you can't sell to a hospital anymore. And you can't sell. And I feel like if we could figure that out, we could go from a company that sells, instead of selling dishwashers, to a whole bunch of different types of businesses. We're selling, the personal discipline and structure that helps people get more done and make more money. We're selling this to, we have a large number of lawyers, a large number of accountants, online coaches. We have financial advisors. We have some small business owners in the brick and mortar world, but they're kind of it's like one person from this industry, one person from that industry. And the thing that binds them all together is a mindset of freedom and family, but it's not something like nobody wakes up in the mornings and identifies as that. So that's where I feel like we are stuck and struggling, is figuring that piece of the puzzle out. Because if we knew what the right approach was there, then we just apply all these things that work to that opportunity.
What stands out to me as you talk about this is that a good portion of your audience is living and dying by hourly billing. And if they have, say, a monthly nut they've got to make in terms of billable hours, if they're undisciplined at work, if they lack discipline, if they are disengaged, if they are sloppy, they miss out on billable hours. However, if they're productive, effective, they manage their energy, manage their time, they get more done. Now, because they have to hit a monthly nut, if, let's say that, for a simple example, 8 hours a day, if you have someone working at 100% effectiveness and they get 8 hours a day done, great. But if you have someone who's working at 75% effectiveness, well, maybe they need to stay behind an hour or two. They've got to worry, they lose their day, they don't get to be with their family, and then they're tired, and the next day they're less effective. And so they burn their billable hour potential. This is just an observation. I'm not saying this is true, but I would start with this as an identified potential opportunity of how could you get in front of a huge group of individuals who need to be highly productive. That's where you start, because you also don't know who you're necessarily competing with at this point. You can't develop an easy strategy. But take Kirkland and Ellis. You know Kirkland and Ellis?
No.
Major bankruptcy firm out of Chicago. And as a result, they do these really intense filings, sometimes pulling incredibly long hours, the classic thing that you hear about with attorneys. So they're pulling these incredibly long hours. Now, the question is, are they pulling incredibly long hours because they're ineffective? Could they get the same amount of billable work done in half the time? Or is it because they don't know how to manage their work? Is it because they don't have discipline? What's driving this? Now, if there's any attorneys listening to this, I'm sure they'd have an opinion. I'm just providing an outside idea. The other one is something like Alix Partners. So Alix Partners was primarily a restructuring consultancy. Same thing, billable hours. If you waste hours, you can't build it. That's a huge commercial upside for any major firm. Now, your history is direct-to-consumer sales. You started off selling Word docs through a Hotmail email address, right? PayPal link. Yeah. So that's always going to be, the genetics of your DNA is to think of that kind of angle. But if you were to run, for say Kirkland and Ellis, a pilot program and demonstrate to them that you could reduce the time to achieve billable hours by say 15%. So every day they added 80 minutes or something back into, they increased the billable hours by say 80 minutes or something every single day. That stacks up pretty quick. And Kirkland and Ellis, for example, might say, wow, this is incredible. We'll pay you $500,000 for this because you're giving it to all our staff. This makes sense. It's a different question of where's the value that I'm really adding and who needs that? And we all have a habit of iterating on the thing we're already doing. So when we iterate on what we're already doing, we're looking at this very, very narrow perspective. Sometimes you just got to step back 30,000 feet and say, all right, well, what makes sense here? Now, my guess is that there are some people who sell quote unquote time management programs, but they're probably less competitive than you because you've had skin in the game for 20 years and you know the true value of managing your time effectively. And that resonates with lawyers who make money from billings. That's what drives their bonus. That's what drives their caseloads. That to me is interesting.
Yeah.
Then the secondary part is once you test it, if you're right, because that's the first thing, it's testing it, right? I could be completely wrong. Try the same thing with KPMG, Accenture, any consulting firm, anyone selling billable hours. But then once you've proven that idea works, right? The question, and it's obviously it's a different sales strategy, it's a different relationship building strategy. And then you can ask yourself, how do I solidify and how do I turn that into a competitive advantage? So that's one part of it. However, you also have to ask, am I willing to do this? And that's really important.
Yeah, it definitely is. Okay. No, it's very helpful. And, I'm sure we'll chat about this some more. And I hope everybody got some got a little inside baseball into, what I think about on a regular basis. So we didn't even get to like most of the questions that I had, especially about talking about how to get rich with Felix Dennis, but we did talk about some good stuff that'll help people for the next couple of months till I get you back on this for another interview, maybe before Christmas.
You know what?
Definitely left me with a lot of stuff to think about. So I'm sure there's a lot of other things for people to think about too.
Well, I hope it helps. What I was going to say is on our little hit list, have we got 5 more minutes? Can we do 5
absolutely.
minutes? So you wrote here partnerships, when to do them, why to avoid them, and how to solve them.
Oh, yeah.
And I've had some good experiences with partnerships, and I've had some miserable experiences with partnerships. And I think if you talk to anyone who's built more than one business, you'll start to hear a similar story. Partnerships are really good when they're really good. But when you are inexperienced with partnerships, all sorts of problems. So here's the hot takes. One, if you don't need to do a partnership, don't. Like, people like me are pretty dominant personalities. And at the start, people love how dominant and assertive I am. But over time, that wears them down, and they don't like that. This is something I've just noticed about me as a personality and being involved in a partnership. So be really, really honest and ruthlessly self-aware. What is your weakness that will negatively affect the partnership? And likewise, what's your partner's weakness? Are they resentful? Are they harm avoidant, but you're really proactive and risk comfortable? If you don't need to do a partnership, and we're talking about an equity-based partnership here, don't, is my perspective, if you can get away from it. But sometimes equity is cheaper than cash, and you want to have the option to pay someone in equity. And I get that, and that's a really good strategy at different times. What comes down to that is, as an attorney from Texas once said to me, is making sure you've got a clear plan for all the options. So I once had a stake in a company, and the agreement in this company was with a person who I'd known for years. We were friends, we traveled together, we holidayed together, went to all different countries together. And in our shareholders agreement, we wrote that anyone can sell their shares with unanimous decision from the directors. And we were friends. Why wouldn't we agree that if someone wanted to get out, they could sell? It's a great idea, except that he, in the end, when I wanted to sell, didn't want to buy. And he didn't want to let me sell them. He just wanted to hold onto them in a buyer script. Now, this is the same individual who flew to a foreign country, took my name off a bank account and lied about it to my face. That was a partnership. And that was a partnership where legally I was stuck in a position where I'd agreed to something. And I found out about the bank account stuff later, but I didn't really have any options. So understanding that in dissolution of a partnership, you want to have that pre-planned and pre-agreed on. And I think the ideal language there is, hey, listen, we get along super well right now. And while things are really good, and I hope they stay good forever, let's just be honest, sometimes things happen. How might we solve this? And the classic dissolutions are buying each other out. So it's called right of first refusal. So if Craig and I are in business together and we said, hey, you know what? We're going to start this new company. We're going to sell time management to Kirkland and Ellis and other law firms. We're going to have this business 50-50. What we might say is, in the event that any partner wants to exit, the first thing that must be done is a fair market value or appraisal of the business by a certified broker. And then the other partner has the opportunity to buy out the shares at that price or at that valuation. And they have 30 days to exercise that option. That might be something you do. Or you might go the other way and say, hey, right of first refusal, I can go solicit any offer I want for those shares. And if you don't want to buy them at that price, that's up to you, but I have to offer it to you first after receiving a written valuation or written offer. And I think it's really important for me to highlight this to people because I've seen partnerships go bad. You and I have talked about other partnerships that we've seen have gone horribly. And it always ends up happening that the world changes. A deal is a deal doesn't exist. It changes over time. People change, life changes, things happen to us, things that go well, things that go poorly. And you never know when you're going to upset or offend somebody by an accidental slight. So being aware that you have to pre-negotiate paths out of the business and leave room to renegotiate paths into the business, I think is vital. So those are my little hot tips on partnerships. There's plenty more that we could cover, but I think that's a really good jump off point for people to get them thinking about. It's not just a contract. This is an agreement to work together to make money. What happens when you can't work together? What happens when someone's not performing? What happens when the business isn't doing so well, or someone gets sick, or someone gets angry? And just making sure that you have a clear path out there on a mental basis you can't be blocked from.
Yeah. You need to be very, very slow going into partnerships, painfully slow. And
Yeah.
I made the mistake in 2020 of getting into another one that was just a complete waste, because you get super excited and yeah. So partnerships, it's like when I was growing up, Rob, living on the farm, we would go and collect beer bottles in the ditches outside, we didn't have a lot of money. So my mom would, like, in springtime when all the snow would melt, she'd like give me a bag and I'd go and collect all these beer bottles, like 5 or 10 cents. And every 100 bottle, you'd find a mouse inside the bottle. And it's like a partnership is like a mouse in a beer bottle. It's easy to get in, but it's tough to get out.
100%. 100%. I think you actually really nailed it. Is most people default
unless eventually the mouse starts to break down in the beer and it becomes this slimy thing and it just pours right out. But you don't want that for your partnership.
Yeah, you don't want that. But I think you did. You have it at home. Is most people treat partnerships like that scenario. They want a bit of extra cash, so they go out hunting for a partnership, and they end up with a mouse in a beer bottle. And it's really important to understand that a partnership has to have that commercial upside. Like, if you want to hang out with your mate, cool, go hang out with your mate, man. And I know Ezra Firestone talks about, so his CEO, Molly, told me this once. People will often be like, oh, I can't believe Ezra Firestone, hires his family. That's so weird, man. Like, I could never do that. It's like, yeah, but Ezra can. Ezra knows himself. He knows who he is. He knows who his family is. He's not under any misgivings. Other people cannot stand to have a personal relationship with the people they work with. Also totally fine. But just be really aware that you're just not defaulting into a partnership because you're being mentally lazy. Like, think about it. Is this a good deal to do? How does this pay off? That's it.
Too much. Partnerships are generally too much. Everybody gets blinded by the downside. Like most relationships, they overlook a lot of flaws in the other person, and it should be. There should be you spend a lot of time with somebody and really, travel with them. And, if you're going to be, depends on how you're going to be working with them, but you got to get to know the person, because you can get into a partnership with somebody who's an outright crook and scammer, who can fool you for 3 months as you get involved in the business. So be very, very slow. And in most cases, especially with the friends partnership, just hire them, just pay them money, because you'll pay them a lot less as a salary, even if it's a lot now, than you will in when the partnership goes sour. So we could go on and on and on. So we will go on and on and on. Yeah, we'll go on and on and on at another time. Rob, very, very helpful, my friend. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, man. Always a pleasure to jump on and riff.
Yeah, we get a lot of feedback from these podcasts. So everybody, send me your questions on Instagram at Real Craig Valentine. You can find Rob on Instagram at Rob Hanley. That's HANLY, Rob Hanley on Instagram. And you can also email me at craig@earlytorise.com and let me know your questions to ask Rob on a future show.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you very much, my guy. I'll catch you next time.
Talk soon, my friend.